Meanwhile, at Golden Apple Kindergarten. You bitch. How did you raise your daughter? Just look at what this little bastard has done. She scratched my son's face. I've raised my son tenderly, and he has never been injured. How dare this little bastard hurt my son? She's asking for trouble. A well-dressed and pudgy rich woman was screaming and pointing her finger at Cecilia. Beside her stood a chubby boy, looking quite arrogant. The boy had a strong physique and was much taller than other kids his age. There was a faint scratch on the left side of his face. Mrs. Lansky, it's common for children to have small arguments and fights. Besides, it was your son who started it. Cecilia was heartbroken to see Haley's face swollen. However, due to Mrs. Lansky's identity, she didn't dare lash out. HMPH. So what if my son struck first? If it wasn't for this little bastard provoking my son, he wouldn't have hit her. In the end, it's still this little bastard's fault. Mrs. Lansky snarled with her hands on her hips. Haley, what exactly happened? Did you cause trouble? Cecilia asked. No, I didn't. Haley shook her head repeatedly, looking very aggrieved. Mac insulted me first. He said I didn't have a dad and called me a little bastard. Then, he told the other classmates to attack me. Mommy, I didn't do anything wrong. It's not my fault. As she spoke, tears began to roll down her cheeks once more. Don't cry. Haley, Mommy believes you. Cecilia wiped her daughter's tears and then turned to Mrs. Lansky. Mrs. Lansky, did you hear that? It's you who didn't raise your son well. He not only insulted my daughter, he even hit her. Besides, my daughter's injuries on her face are much more severe than your son's. The unexpected scene shocked everyone present. Nobody could have predicted that someone would actually hit Mrs. Lansky's son. Everyone knew that Mrs. Lansky was infamous for being a tyrant in this area. Nobody dared to offend her. Oh my God, my son! After a momentary shock, Mrs. Lansky screamed. She rushed forward clumsily and wrapped the disoriented, chubby kid in her arms. The little kid now had a crooked nose and busted lips. His mouth was also covered in blood, with 2 front teeth missing. Half of his face was extremely red and swollen. Son, don't scare me like this. Wake up. Mrs. Lansky was panicking and pinched his nose repeatedly to wake him up. It was only after he woke up that she calmed down slightly. However, very soon, her expression turned hideous. She screamed, "Who was it that hit my son? Who was it? Reveal yourself." She turned around, looking like she was about to commit murder. It was me. Dustin stepped forward with a dark expression. His gaze turned murderous, especially when he noticed the injury on Cecilia and Haley's face. You son of a bitch! How dare you hit my son? Do you know who I am? Mrs. Lansky roared. All along, she had been the one doing the bullying. No one had ever dared create a scene with her.